I don't know how many times I need to say this, but I'm going to say it as often as I can. This is a paradigm shift. This is something different. This is a new way of doing business. And what it is that we are working together, taking hold of this thing, you know, that's been so important to our operation of our libraries, and we're managing it, and we're making it what we want to make it. So that's going to be kind of my reoccurring theme. But we didn't get there just because we thought that was a good idea. We basically had years of frustration, like a lot of you maybe have, with different vendors. Even as I was talking about my history in technology in libraries, I've experienced that. You know, it's been so frustrating to have such an important part of your business not under your control. And I want to take issue with one thing that Bob presented from a different perspective. He showed you those quartiles of 89% of the money and the wealth, you know, with a few libraries, and then 11%. Now representing, you know, having previously been in the 11% side, you know, I might have agreed with that, but having now been in the 89% side, you know, I could say one of our big frustrations is, you know, the vendors, what they do is they sell a thing, and the more of these things they can sell, the better off. So they don't care whether they're selling a thing to a big library or a small library, as long as they sell things, a thing. So our frustration, and a lot of the libraries we worked with, you know, with the kind of available vendor, you know, supported things, was that they just couldn't buy the service they need, because again, the business model was one of selling a thing as opposed to providing a service or being focused on development to what libraries needed, and it was going to be different. And I don't blame them necessarily, because one of the things is they can't. These are proprietary systems that were developed by somebody in the basement of BYU or something like that, and frankly, they don't know how to change it, or it's too expensive to change it. Anyway, I don't know what the deal is, but so we had a number of things in our system that we wanted to do. Just to name a few, we wanted to do e-commerce, we wanted to do self-checkout, we wanted to integrate web-based services in the catalog so that, you know, that the things would be interchangeable. We wanted to mail. We used to mail everything to our patrons, and it was a great service. We had to stop it because the post office upped their rates, and it was really not sustainable, I think. But anyway, we wanted to re-establish the service if people wanted to, because we had a pretty good delivery system, and we thought, well, we could offer this and we really wouldn't interfere with our basic philosophy of providing free and open access to everybody on an equal basis. We wanted to be able to mail stuff to patrons if they wanted to pay a fee. We couldn't do it with our system. And remember, that map again, the corporate map, we have a community with really strong, high expectations of their technology, and here we were hamstrung. We couldn't do anything. People could say, I could write the code for this, you know. Yeah, you could if you could get into the source code, you know. But we had all these Microsoft people and everybody else telling us how terrible this was, because we couldn't do some things that were just really obvious that libraries ought to be doing, or at least our library ought to be doing. And so that was one thing. So we were really frustrated, and I see heads nodding, so I'm sure that you kind of experienced the same thing. You know, again, we went, even in King County, we went through the 7-year itch thing of, you know, working with Dynex, then working with Innovative, and you know, all those things. And again, no matter what the sales pitch, by the time you really got down to it, it just wasn't going to. They sold a thing, and that was pretty much what you were left with, was that thing that you got. And so that led to a number of years of what I like to call Conversation A and Conversation B. Conversation A, you know, darn it, we need to take control of this. We need to develop our own system. We need to really, you know, get in there and do this kind of thing. Conversation B, no library's ever been successful at doing that. You know, you'd be crazy to do that. You know, it's too much work. It's too difficult. It's, you know, you don't have the resources. How are you going to keep it up? You know, you'll never be able to do that. So Conversation A, Conversation B. We must have spent 10 years having those two same conversations. Every time we get frustrated, we have the same thing. So at the same time, or maybe during that time, we also started to have, at least in our situation, other large libraries were getting together and talking about their frustration working with their vendor. And I don't think that the vendor at the time was much different, but there were some real interesting things going on, you know, with our vendor, and we were having real problems in the libraries. Some of the libraries were reporting they were getting fired by their vendor. I mean, they actually got fired. They fired clients. They said, we're not going to do anything for you anymore. Actually, that's one of our fears, that maybe we're going to get them so, you know, unhappy that they may fire us before we're ready to be fired. Anyway, that's another story. That's an answer to a question that came up. But I mean, you know, honestly, one way or another, kind of bullying and using their position and being really difficult, both personally and in a business manner. Other vendors, you know, you've heard and maybe you've experienced, they go out of business or they sell out to another larger company who doesn't know anything about the library industry per se. You know, you get ignored, you get yelled at, you get, you know, I mean, you get promises broken, the whole thing, you know. And of course, the only positive part is what Jed likes to point out is we always had somebody to blame. So there was that part of it, you know. So there was some solace in the fact that we could always blame somebody for all this stuff. But you know, frankly, it just wasn't working. I know that Amy and Jed and I and others were in the PLA Technology Committee for years. We used to we actually have forums about this. And so it's a widespread issue. So we decided to put an end, or at least, you know, stop having conversation in Conversation B by hiring an outside source to really help us investigate whether or not there were any alternatives. We hired a company called Open Source, or not Open Source, but Soft Resources, and they actually did the technology for the Winter Olympics. So it's a pretty big firm in our area, and they know a lot. Actually, our CPAs suggested we talk to them. And they went out and investigated all sorts of possibilities. They looked at the library marketplace, but then they went and looked at FedEx, they looked at UPS, they looked at Blockbuster, they looked at anybody that was in the business of lending something to people, to look at their software. I mean, these guys were really good to see whether or not there were any models out there that made any sense for us to pursue. So they came back, and this was after like 6 months or a year of investigation. Here's what they found. They found the library marketplace was terrible. Well, we could have told them that, but they said, just, you know, forget it. I mean, this is going nowhere. And their sense, you know, because they come from a CPA background and everything else, was there just wasn't enough money in it for, you know, there to be a real alternative there. They looked at these private things and they said, first of all, it's the same proprietary stuff, so you're really not, and the companies are not likely to give it to you. And they didn't see that it was necessarily doing anything that was that great that we weren't able to do or think about in the library land. They said, you know what, and this was back, I want to say 7 years ago or so, they said, there's some stuff happening out there with open source, and we think that you guys might want to take a look at that.